Good evening. Yes. Okay. As should be clear, I'm not a natural YouTuber, so let's see how this goes. Talking to a camera is interesting experience. Oh, a pigeon just has landed on my studio window. Okay. Best you don't come in. Yeah, I wanted to. What did I want to talk about today? I wanted to say something again. I'm kind of in this fundamentals of analog synthesis, or not of synthesis itself, but ideas around it. So, why has there been this huge resurgence in modular and analog synthesis? I think a few years ago, everyone was kind of talking about the sound, the sound of all these old analog machines, and a lot of people were very interested in trying to get the Mini Moog sound or the Korg MS-20 sound, or Buchla low pass gate, or these sort of classic sounds that have been featured on great recordings that some of us grew up with and other people have discovered as historical recordings. Yes, I think that's part of it, but I don't think that's the main part of it. And when I wrote an article which I'll link a few years ago about this, and I think since I wrote that article, it's very clear that a lot of digital modules have come into existence, and that has its pros and cons. I use a few of those. I've just started using the mutable instruments marbles, which is an incredible bit of technology. It's up there with classics from Buchla and people like that. And this particular module, in the last talk I gave, I talked about the idea of having a core voltage, which you can then use to divide and split off into different versions and modulate these in different ways, and also the possibility of morphing. So you can take a stream of CV information and control 4 different oscillators or different filters, and then you can use that CV or another CV, like a low frequency oscillator, in order to modulate those, and you can use indexes in order to modulate those by different amounts. And this is very much how I work. I mean, I make other kinds of patches as well, of course, but this, especially for performing, this is the main kind of patch I use. And there's different ways of doing it with a surge synthesizer, or with a EMS, or with the Hordijk, or the Eurorack system that I use. And the mutable marbles basically does a lot of that in a way that I was using a lot of different modules for previously, and it's very much how I was working, because you can also use it as a voltage processor, which is in fact how I use it. I don't use its own generative abilities at all. I use other devices for that I can control in different ways, and then use that to split off these different modulations to control different parts of the modular. So this is my way of working. Of course, there's many ways to work, but this is one as soon as I discovered this, I was using a modular in the studio for a few years, thinking this is a wonderful instrument to mess about with and to make material to use in compositions. But I even though at heart I'm a performer, stage performer, I wasn't thinking I would ever be on stage with a modular synthesizer. And the first concerts I did some concerts with a bigger surge system than this, and both concerts I found I ran out of ideas for the limitations of the patch that I had a little bit too quickly. Both these concerts were playing 2 sets, I think, and I found out that by the second set I didn't have much else to do. Either I had to frantically repatch the thing in the interval, when frankly I'd rather be enjoying a beer, and or I somehow ended up doing a similar thing in the second set to what I did in the first set. And also there's a left brain, right brain aspect to this, which is part of the brain is good at synthesizing, is more spontaneous, is working in real time, and another part of the brain is useful for planning. And what I found with modular synthesizers was that this planning part of the brain was not somewhere where I wanted to be on stage. So I don't patch on stage that much. I more start with a basic patch, and then I make certain kind of adjustments to that as I go along. But the idea of repatching completely on stage, I'm not interested in that, because it takes my brain to another place, to a sort of place where I'm thinking about language and structure, and okay, this goes here, this is modulating this. And on stage I want to be thinking about sound, and I want to exist in the time of that performance. So I didn't know how to perform, how to deal with this situation. And this idea of using a core voltage really opened, as soon as I realized I could do that, it really opened up the whole modular as a performance instrument, which that was a few years ago, and I've done a lot of that since. So yeah, in this context, whether something's digital or analog doesn't really make any difference. And indeed, there's been so many digital modules come out, which are basically little computers, little microprocessors under voltage control, that a lot of those things are basically serving analog functions, and you have analog control, but it's actually a computer. Well, who cares? I don't want to use a laptop on stage. I don't want to be on stage with Max MSP. I have been. I didn't like it, especially when it crashed repeatedly. So I want to have an analog system, but if there's microprocessors in that serving functions, especially if it's serving them in a very economical way, then why not? So this is related to another idea that people had, and I don't think they have so much anymore, of analog purism. And this is a sort of fake discussion that would happen on forums. People would talk about analog purists and blah, 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 and people who get into modular, it's nostalgic. They want the old sounds. I mean, I have literally never met anyone like that. Complete straw man argument. People kind of creating this analog digital conflict, or thinking that must be the reason people get into analog, because they don't like digital. It's complete nonsense. I think it's getting less because these digital modules have they've become, well, they're dominant in many systems. I mean, there's a lot of things I don't like about them. I don't like it when they emulate a computer. I don't like it when they have a menu structure. I'm not going to sit on stage thinking, oh yeah, it's page 1 and I need this. Again, this is the wrong part of my brain. This is fine in the studio. I don't want to be doing that in public. It's at that point it becomes very similar to having a laptop on stage. So this is not a religious belief. It's a practical one. As for the sound, there's something. Well, there's a couple of things you can do with analog that are very special, and sometimes particular components give a particular kind of collection of things that make for a particular sound and response. And there's no better example than the EMS Synthy than that. There's something about the way it's designed, non-linearities, flaws, distortions, things that don't make any sense, like you turn a knob that isn't connected with anything, but it changes the sound. Okay? So there's this amazing, you don't want a microprocessor in this machine. It's doing what it's doing. But something like this Buchler, I don't know how well you can see it, this Buchler 248-1602, known as the MAF, it's basically a computer. It's giving you some CV outputs, but basically it's there's a microprocessor in there. It's a computer and the analog outputs are super important, but it's not a pure analog machine. Does anybody care about that? I don't think anyone in the world gives a crap. It's a sort of kind of false division. That's what I want to say, between analog and digital. Also, I think one of the greatest modular synthesizers ever made, I look around to see if I can see it on my shelf, and I can't, it must be somewhere else, is the Nord Micro Modular. It's this big. It's a tiny thing. There's a complete digital modular in there, and it sounds fantastic. It doesn't sound like an analog synthesizer, but it sounds fantastic. So yeah, and a lot of digital oscillators are also fine. So yes, there are some differences, and there's times when you particularly want to use a particular kind of analog filter, and the craziness of these analog systems. There's something about the analog fluctuating voltages, the way that shapes are made, that's quite special. But I just don't think that's the main thing. I think the reason that this MAF stands as an analog synthesizer is also partly to do with the interface. That with the interface you're controlling a real object, and I think this is the main point that I want to make today. That although in theory you can do everything these devices will do in a digital domain, the only limit to that, well, there's two limits. One is processing power, and Rob Hordijk, who's a brilliant digital designer as well, he worked on the Nord Modular. He's as well as being a brilliant analog designer. He said that this machine, he could realize the whole thing digitally. It would respond the same, it would sound the same pretty much. But why? Analog is so efficient at certain tasks that the amount of processing power you would use, you'd kind of need a supercomputer to recreate this really as it is. And what's the point? Because analog is already doing certain of these functions much more efficiently, much more cheaply, and so there's something about processing that's important in this choice of whether you do a particular function in analog or digital. Another thing is, well, look at this thing. Look at my hands. Look at my body. I hope you can actually see this on the camera. I haven't checked, but I assume you can. This is body sized. This is person sized. Look at the surge. It's made to sit in front of me. It's made to do what it does. Same with the MAF. Even more so with the EMS. This isn't built into a suitcase, for God's sake. It's designed for a person to play. And if you work with any of these machines or similar machines over a long period of time, your body, it's not just a question of these are the functions, I'm patching it with this analytical side of my brain, with this mapping, with this planning side of my brain. My body learns it. I want to change a filter, I go to it. I don't need to think about it because my body, my brain learns this. Oh, this function. Oh, what does this do? Okay. And then when that's there, that becomes almost instinctive. It's learned behavior, but it goes deep. And so when I'm performing, I'm often making a lot of continuous adjustments. And there isn't part of my brain thinking, oh, I need to close this filter, or I need to slow the tempo down, or I need to add some distortion, or I'm going to change the range of this random generator. It's my body knows these things. My hands learn it. And there's no process by which the processor or software gets upgraded and those functions change. So when I learn this, I'm learning a set of functions, but I'm learning a physical object, and I can put this in its case. I can put it away for 3 months and get it out, or 3 years. I'm going to get it out, and firstly, it's going to work. There's not going to be a software upgrade. This is not an Apple computer where all the functions are going to change and none of your software works. This is an object. Of course, all electronics can fail, and there could be things that go wrong with the components. The pots could get crackly, or something could fail. The power supply could fail. But within a reasonable sense of the word, this is a reliable object that isn't going to change. So once I've learnt this, it's like a saxophone, slightly more reliable than a saxophone actually, but then I have it for life. And I see all these instruments, I mean the instruments I've chosen to keep and explore over a long period of time, these are instruments for life. I'm not going to replace this, I'm not going to replace this, I'm not going to replace this. And I think this is a huge reason behind the resurgence of interest in these, in modular synthesizers, in analog synthesizers in general. However, well, I want to make clear I am not anti-Eurorack. I don't use Eurorack in the studio very much, but Eurorack's enabled me to have an incredibly complex performance system that I can carry about, and that I can kind of define each module, each function in exactly a way that is appropriate for me. So I'm not like Eurorack's crap, or I'm not one of these synthy snobs that thinks that. Although again, I think there's less and less of those about as well. You know, Eurorack's kind of won the argument. But the culture around Eurorack is a little bit toxic, because there's so many modules. When I started, there was Dopfer, there was Plan B, there was Analog Systems, and there was almost nothing else. Schweiman. But even then, it's like more than 10 years ago, designing a system was still incredibly confusing. Do I need one of those or two of that? How many oscillators? What does that thing do? Where's the manual? Oh, there isn't a manual. So that was confusing then, and now there's thousands. Look on Modular Grid, there's thousands and thousands of modules. That's amazing. When you look at the functions in these modules, it gets a bit less amazing, because you start thinking, okay, is this based on Surge? Is this based on Buchla? Is this based on Moog? Is this a copy of a Korg or some other circuit? And it actually is a bit more boring when you look into it. But the culture that developed online is really confusing and quite divided. On the one side, I'm incredibly positive about it. I learnt from two main sources: the Nord Modular mailing list at the time, which was incredible, had an amazing amount of very smart people on it, much smarter than me. So I learnt a lot from people like Rod Hordijk and Jan Punter and other people on this list. And then this went into the world more of forums, and again, there were people that could tell you a lot of stuff that there was no other way of finding out, because the manuals didn't exist, or if they did exist, maybe the manuals are difficult to understand. So, and a lot of these people started to make a living out of it, which is also a great thing for them, because this wasn't driven by Korg, by Yamaha, by Roland. These companies were very slow to see what was happening. Korg was the one that woke up and realized, actually, this is not only can we play in this market, but it's actually fun to do that. This was driven by tiny companies, by individuals, Rex Probe and Robin Wood and Ken Stone and Dieter Dopfer and a bunch of other people, Cynthia, and there's a few of them scattered around, and they were pretty much separate and working with different formats. and Eurorack somehow became the common language in the way that English often kind of functions internationally. It made it possible to build a hybrid Surge, Buchla, Moog, Schraman, whatever. So Eurorack was like an incredible gift to this process of the modular resurgence. Eurorack's key to it. But thousands of modules, you don't know where to start. You don't know if you buy the right one. So you can spend months, you can spend thousands of euros buying systems that don't make sense, because who the hell knows how to plan a modular system other than somebody who's already worked with a modular system for years? So nobody's first modular system's right. There's always something you want to change. And then you get into the forums, and then you get into kind of vaporware, like, oh, this module's coming out. Okay, I can't complete my system until I get this module, and this module doesn't appear, or it appears too late. So you're working with the system, and instead of having this feeling, this is an object, this is what I have to relate to, I can't really change it in any huge way. Instead of thinking that, you're thinking, yeah, but another part of my mind's, this is what it's going to be, or I don't like this, I'm going to change this for one from a different manufacturer, or I wish they'd make a faster envelope. And then, of course, on one side you have this incredible freedom to be super specific about exactly what you want and exactly what you need, but on the other hand you have this paranoia that, firstly, I don't necessarily know what I need, and secondly, I know exactly what I need, but I can't, nobody's making it, or blah blah blah. And then you have some crazy digital sampler, granular processor that costs 600 euros. I think, God, I've heard the demos online. God, I've got to watch that. I've got to get one of those. That's just changing the game completely. And we've all done it. We've all been there. This thing is addictive. And for people who want to perform, for people who want to make compositions, for people who really want to make music, this is a problem. It's like, at some point, I had this huge Eurorack system, and I just used to look at it and think, God, firstly, I can't even look at it. It's all different colors and it's messy. And what the hell is going on with it? Visually, some people love that. I hate it. I like things to look like they're from a science lab. And I can ignore how they look. They just give me the functions. That's all. I don't want lots of different colors and typefaces. And it's personal. Some people love that. I can't stand it. So this huge system I had, I did almost no music on this. I spent years thinking about the system, or just looking at it thinking, what have I done? Why did I sell all my other electronics? Why did I sell my saxophone or my beautiful African marimba to buy all this shit, which I actually hate? This is really what saved me from the horrors of Eurorack. I still use Eurorack. I don't want to get into a fight about this, but I just want to give you my perspective. So this, I'll do a whole talk on this. Some of you are going to know what this is. It's a Blippu box. Again, Rob Hordijk. I keep mentioning him. I mean, I've learned a lot from this guy, and I've learned a lot from his instruments. So in my depths of Eurorack hell, I met Rob in a bar, which is not a place you'd meet him very often, in Amsterdam, because I was at Stime. I was doing a residency at Stime at the time, and Joe Canese said, do you know who this guy is? I said, no. He said, that's Rob Hordijk. He's like Don Buchla, except he's now. So that's okay. That sounds a bit excessive. Who's like Don Buchla? Well, and I met Rob, and it become a long friendship, and we talked a lot over the years, and I give feedback, and he shows me a lot of stuff, and I work with his instruments a lot. So this is the Blippu box. This is the first thing he made. It's a more recent version of it than the original one I had, that I still have somewhere. And instead of looking at this wall of shit that I couldn't deal with, I was sitting on the floor with this and with a Moog filter pedal and delay, having a whale of a time. Because look what it's designed to do. It's designed so you can play it with your hands. It's hand size. It's designed to sit in front of you and be playable, even if you don't know what the hell you're doing. So there's something about the interface that's really important. I'm losing my thread now. Actually, I'm not losing my thread, because this is the main point I wanted to make. That I think it's much less about analog sound. I think it's about the interface and the reliability of a sound-making object, that you can learn it, not in exactly the same way as you learn a keyboard or a drum kit or a saxophone, but not a million miles away. You can learn it to a point where your instinct, where your intuition is driving the instrument. Okay, I'm going to make another point, which is about unpredictability. That because of the non-linearities of analog systems, because they're imperfect, because what goes in is not the same as what comes out, there's a huge potential for non-linearity, for things that you might call chaos or noise, or technically it's a kind of distortion. This non-linearity, by definition, it's distortion. It might not sound like distortion though. It might make things sound smoother. It might make things sound less distorted, but technically it's distortion. This is, with this device, this Blipoo box, it's designed to do that. It's completely designed to do that, because of the way an incredibly primitive digital chip, digital shift register is used. It's designed to be chaotic. It's designed to feed back on itself. It's designed to create streams of information. So this returns to something that I said in the previous talk about the animal nature of these things. So on the one hand, you have an object that you can really interact with and really learn and really play. On the other hand, this object is an animal that has its life, that has its blood. The blood is voltage, it's electricity, but it's an alive thing. It's not, you can look at it as an analog computer, but it's not discrete functions, it's not pure mathematics, it's not pure paths of input and output. Other things can happen. Other things will happen. It can throw ideas at you that you hadn't thought of. So, of course, you can emulate this with computers and with digital systems, and Max MSP, Super Collider, or whatever. Reactor also sounds fantastic. I could have mentioned that earlier when I was talking about the Nord modular. So this non-linearity, although you can model it, due to the nature of analog digital conversion and microprocessing, you can't really set up the same kind of feedback mechanisms with digital systems that you can with analog systems. There's always a delay. There's always a processing delay, even if it's one sample. It's a delay, and it changes the nature of what you can do, because in a feedback system, or all the analog data, whether you think of it as sound or whether you think of it as CV, it doesn't make any difference. It's all circulating in real time. It doesn't matter where it starts or where it goes. Once it's in this relationship where it's feeding back on itself, where it's creating data, where it's generating values, analog values, then it doesn't matter what's the start of that process or what's the finish of it, because it's happening simultaneously. Inputs and outputs are become one. They become a circuit. It's not a It's not waiting to be processed. It's in real time, and of course conceptually that's somehow purer. But again, it's not about conceptualizing, and it's not about rejecting digital. But in terms of choosing what analog can do very well, what it can do very well is creating non-linearities and using those non-linearities, creating feedback paths. And for me, this is the controllable aspect of these machines is absolutely vital. But the uncontrollable aspects of them is also vital. And in terms of my experience of working with analog and digital systems, the analog systems are much more interesting in terms of having an object that feels alive, that's unpredictable, that you can try and tame, or sometimes it just takes you somewhere apparently of its own volition. And so this puts you in a state as a player, as a musician, as a composer of receptiveness. And this is pretty much where I ended the last talk. I think this is kind of how these things go. You might start in different places, but you can end up in some very similar places, because the conclusions are sort of wherever you start with this kind of debate, the conclusions are kind of waiting for you, and they come around again and again. And my conclusion is that I want to work with systems that feel alive, that make me feel more alive, and in fact that insist that I am alive, that I can't dominate these machines with my planning, organizing mind. I have to also be alive as a human being and live in the present tense. So digital technology is wonderful because it has memory. For musicians, digital technology is also terrible because it has memory. It of course there's great ways to use that, but it can easily take you out of the moment. It can easily tie you to decisions that you made 5 minutes earlier, 5 hours earlier, 5 days earlier, or 5 years earlier. And I mean that quite literally. When I was using the sampler from Stein, Lisa, which ran on a MacBook, I had some perfect samples. I had some perfect low-pass gate samples that I'd made from my Plan B system, and it was a particularly good day. I had these incredible sounds, and I used to use them over and over again because I was at a concert. I would think, oh, I've got that sound. That's perfect for now. So again, and the sound, okay, I might be controlling it differently, I might be using different processing, but the sound essentially is the same thing. It's a fixed, dead thing. And maybe nobody in the audience knew that unless they'd been to a lot of my gigs. But I knew that. It's that sound again. Somehow I'm standing up in front of people, I'm improvising, but this is not quite real. I'm not quite functioning in real time. So with something like this, I might say, oh, okay, I'm going to go for that boing kind of low pass gate sound. I'm going to go for it, and I go for it, and something's different, the setting's different, the voltage is different, or I don't know, maybe they just sound different some days, they're warmer or colder. But you don't get exactly the same sound, you get a different sound, and then you have to respond to that sound, you have to build on that sound. So you're in real time, you have to be in real time. There's no other way to play an analog modular synthesizer. You have to listen, and the machine is inviting you to listen, it's inviting you to interact, it's inviting you to function in real time. This is a core reason why I continue to explore these machines. Thank you. I hope it was clear, and I particularly hope that my comments about digital stuff or my comments about Eurorack or are not. I don't want you to understand these as, I don't want to apologize for it all the time, but it's the internet. I don't want them to be understood as side swipes to say that other people are doing it wrong, or that other people are making the wrong choices, or that certain technology is shit. Use what you can. You know, some of my favorite records were recorded on Ableton Live with no hardware at all. So everything's possible. This is my perspective. This is my way. This is the way I've found that I want to interact with musical technology. Thank you.